we talked about the documentary a little bit, and I feel like it brings up some interesting threads. It doesn't necessarily follow through on them. I feel like it's a common documentary thing nowadays with a lot of things, like whether it's like in the kind of true crimey thing, they'll often like follow a thread that's really tantalizing and then just kind of like find some reason to debunk it. In this one, it was like, oh, we figured out that like somebody was just impersonating Bannon. So like it just like crossed him off the list of suspects. And it's like, all right,
Yeah.
Bannon is not Q. But it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, okay, yeah, maybe he didn't literally drive over to that house and take a picture of it, but he still could be like intimately involved. So I think there still is further digging to do. And so we kind of poked around to see what else we could find. And we found this kind of like network of Q hunters, including that guy who claimed that Aquino was Jim Watkins' lawyer. And this guy, Dave Troy, he's written like a huge amount of research on Medium he's really hot on the Q trail and even has kind of like a meta narrative that attempts to explain it. And I think he does a good job up to a point, and then I don't know what it is, but there's like a certain like ontological libness that creeps its way in that kind of derails what I think are like fruitful avenues of inquiry. But I think we can do a brief overview of some of those avenues. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, he did a lot of work, like, you know, in terms of, like, the raw information. Like, again, like, his interpretation of it, yeah, I think that, like, you know, it could be interpreted differently. Yeah, I think that he went a little bit down the rabbit hole, you know. I think he followed the white rabbit, and, you know, he got a little bit blue and on, but, yeah.
Yeah. But along the way, sometimes, you know, even if people end up going crazy along the way, they stumble upon some real shit that you know, there's some nuggets in there. Yeah. So like Dave Troy's thesis, his big thesis about January 6th and the QAnon movement that like leading up to it and this whole milieu around Trump is that the main culprits of organizing the January 6th action and QAnon center around something called the Council for National Policy, the CNP, which was founded in 1981 at the dawn of the Reagan administration as really like a conservative counterpart or competitor to the Council on Foreign Relations, which a lot of this is going to map, like I said a little earlier, like it maps very cleanly to a point onto the Yankee cowboy dialectic, which I think maybe is morphed. It's like, I don't know where the Bushes fit in Yankee. Like, I think they've always straddled both worlds. And it's like some of the QAnon people are very like down on the Bushes, but yet the Bushes like let like the kind of proverbial cowboys and the right wing Iran-Contra networks and the CNP like absolutely go hog wild, especially in W's years. So maybe they're just like putting on a little bit of opposition to the Bushes. But anyways, so this is his main thesis is that this is like a CNP op, basically. They were the most active organizers and participants, but he wants to ask the deeper question, why? Why did history unfold this way? Where did the CNP come from? What are its goals? And, you know, he does counsel, I think, wisely, like to consider this larger historical frame apart from the day-to-day frustrations of party politics, which reveals a number of key themes. CNP was born from the same network of people who created both the John Birch Society and the World Anti-Communist League. In turn, those networks are tightly associated with the birth of American libertarianism and also harbor a fervent and lingering passion for the gold standard. Within this community, the fear and distrust of communism cannot be separated from the libertarian non-aggression principle and the preference for the gold standard. The fetish for gold is in fact directly tied into the non-aggression principle in that they see inflationary fiat currency as a kind of, quote, molestation, as articulated by Robert Lefebvre, who is the founder of the CNP, considered by many to be the progenitor of modern American libertarian thought. And he drops a very interesting clue early on that I never read Jane Mayer's book about the Kochs, but he said in that book, it talks about the connections between Koch libertarianism and I am theosophy, which, you know, of course, on this podcast, that jumps out at you right away. Okay, of course, there's a theosophy connection. And it did trigger the memory of like some other cults that spun off from the I am kind of theosophy movement in like the early 20th century. But basically, he actually says, like, the longer term trends animating current disputes include relitigating the New Deal, the gold standard, now mapped to cryptocurrency, central banks, multilateral alliances, taxation, Vatican II, abortion, women's rights, climate change, fossil fuel dependence, and anti-Semitism. And, that does, it sounds very the kind of things the Yankees and Cowboys would kind of be bickering over. And, but then he also says, like, the overarching conflict is whether the world should seek to pursue democratic or so-called neo-feudal forms of governance. I'm sorry. I think, like, both of them want different forms of neo-feudalism in a lot of ways. Like, or I think both of them are bringing to. I think if either of these main factions got their way, the CNP or the CFR, it would trend towards some form of neo-feudalism that might just have different characteristics. But to say that, like, everyone in the Council of Foreign Relations is like defending democracy, like,
that's definitely not true. I don't know about, like, a feudalism thing. I feel like, maybe, like, in a very, like, vague sense, but really it's just, like, what they're both pursuing is, like, capitalism, like a higher form of capitalism.
Like oligarchic
like,
capitalism.
Feudalism.
No, it's true. It's true. I think what they mean is, like, a reversion, an erosion of rights of, like, being able to own property or, basically be dependent on, like, corporate lore. I mean, it's used in a very euphemistic way nowadays to say, like, we're sliding back into, like, neo-feudalism. Of course,
literally 100 years ago, like, not really, like, medieval times. Like, that's not, like, or serfdom.
Yeah.
I guess, like, you hear about the road to serfdom or whatever, but really, like,
which is a big libertarian bugaboo book. Von Mises and all that.
The whole thing about the ownership of property, like, well, do you really own, like, does anyone really own property, like, in the United States? Like,
well, they own,
really.
People own houses. That's probably the main form of property that still exists, is they're homeowners in the United States.
And they pay property taxes to the government.
Yeah, which is, like, literally genocide, according to libertarians. But
anyway.
And I think, so I think this is kind of interesting, though I think later he kind of, like, maybe gets it a little wrong. But talking about, like, Russiagate and stuff, he said America has had a particularly difficult time the last 5 years trying to deal with well-documented, quote, Russian meddling and the persistent denial thereof by those who point to Americans as being just as culpable. Ultimately, meddling was a counter-descriptive term because a network of Americans, Russians, Europeans, Chinese, Australians, Brazilians, and people in many other countries have all collaborated to promote illiberal forces across the globe. It should not be a surprise that Eduardo Bolsonaro was present on January 6th, or that Polish MP Dominik Tarczynski and Germany's AfD Peter Bistron have attended events hosted by Phyllis Schlafly's Eagles organization. Indeed, it is a networked coalition. Now, that's, like, kind of true. And I mean, yes, they're promoting illiberalism. Like, that's true just as it was in the 80s. They were promoting a kind of, like, hardcore anti-communist, like, right-wing dictatorship if necessary. But I don't know. That kind of, again, it assumes that the benevolent Council on Foreign Relations and, like, the Atlantic Council are, like, just interested in, like, liberal democracy and, like, if only these, like, conservatives would get out of the way. So I think it's giving a bit of a pass, as one might expect. It's still, this is a bit of a partisan screed, but this guy goes, he does touch on some things that are good, that we've all talked about before. Like, his part 2 is all about Biosphere 2, that Steve Bannon was brought in by Texas oil billionaire arch cowboy Ed Bass to help curb costs on the project that as it was getting out of control. He does mention, interestingly, in broad strokes, Biosphere 2 is a kind of Burning Man happening, but recast as science fair project set in the Arizona desert. Run by a collective of theater geeks, it arguably was as much a product of the counterculture as it was any kind of scientific exploration. Its purpose, to discover the effects of climate change. Bannon was the perfect person to put a pin in it, and in early 1994, he did. In May 2001, former child actor Brock Pierce, then age 20, started a company called Internet Gaming Entertainment, or IGE. Pierce found that he could mine virtual goods in games like EverQuest, blah, blah, blah. IGE helped popularize something important.
You can see our episode on this very topic.
Maybe our second Alwara episode, The Den of Daemons. We go into deep length of Steve Bannon's connections. Again, Mr. Promoting Pizzagate, Mr. I'm rubbing elbows with QAnon, gave, I believe, he secured $30 million in investment funding via Goldman Sachs for Brock Pierce, like after he had gone through the whole Den pedo scandal and was like living in like a drug dealer villa in Marbella with Mark Collins Rector with like a bunch of machine guns and like a mountain of child porn, and was like had been arrested by Interpol, I believe, in 2003. So, and who also, let's not forget, Bannon was Office of Naval Intelligence. Mark Collins Rector became a contractor with the U.S. Navy in the mid-2000s after his legal troubles kind of blew over, and he moved back to Florida and was, I believe, he got a contract to develop underwater drones for the Navy, and he was based out of Boca Raton. And Steve Bannon was also down in South Florida. If anybody's ever heard the weird story that Ed Opperman has covered about Steve Bannon's porn and meth house down, I forget exactly what city in South Florida it was in, but basically the person who like rented it out after he owned it and had been renting it out to people, when this guy went in, there was like acid corrosion in the bathtub, like they were cooking meth. There were locks on the outside of the bedroom doors to like lock people inside, and like there was rumors that there had been like like porn was being shot there, and like in Steve Bannon's house. So it's like, what the, okay, this guy is like the paragon of virtue, but you notice like the mainstream media, nor this guy, he doesn't bring up Mark Collins Rector, he doesn't bring up the pedophilia stuff. It's weird, isn't it? Like you're just gonna mention Brock Pierce for the cryptocurrency? Like that's the only thing you're gonna mention about Brock Pierce? Really? Like, I mean, come on. Buffalo JA is like jaw-jawing super hard right now reading this.
Right, yeah. The jaw-jaws are flying.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.